As a teacher of sophomores, and I know as a teacher of freshmen and juniors and seniors, when you think about everything we're responsible for in the course of a year, do you sometimes get panicky? And you think, I can't do all that. How can I do all that? How can I make it make sense to the kids? And sometimes that can be paralyzed, that panic. When you think about, we need to expose them to novels that have literary merit, so that they can draw some kind of strength from the universal nature of those that have gone before them and have recorded it. We need to expose them to informational and argument reading and writing so that they'll be informed citizens and will be prepared to make educated decisions in the world. We need to give them real-world writing practice, and we need to teach them to be analytical and critical thinkers and teach them how to take multiple choice tests so they can graduate from high school and think critically and analytically the rest of their lives. And so sometimes it doesn't make sense to do all this in a kind of fragmented and random way. And so our PLC at J-Town decided that if we sat down and built all of this kind of practice around a common text, that would make more sense. Not just to us as we planned it, but also to the students as they tried to practice all of these skills and absorb everything we're asking them to do. Not just once in their sophomore year or freshman year, but we do it repeatedly, don't we? As soon as we finish one round of practice, we start another round of practice because they've not mastered it yet, and they've not mastered it in a lot of different ways. And so the only way that we could think about that as a PLC is to think about how to build that around a common text. And so that's kind of what we're going to be thinking about today. And in the front of your packet, you see a template. The way we ask students to practice that kind of skill around a common text, how we can give them on-demand and longer writing tasks, and how we can get them to think in a lot of different ways about a single piece of literature that we can talk about with common language and common themes. So I'm going to walk you through. You have a blank template, and the one up on the screen actually has our thinking on it as we planned last year for Othello. And Othello is one play that we teach to all skill levels. We teach it to comprehensive, honors, and advanced students at J-Town. Some of the other novels we teach to different skill levels based on the student's interest and honestly sometimes the availability of our books still at this point. But Othello is a text that we can download free, and we can embed some multiple choice questions into the actual scripts as we give them to the students, and they can perform the script and answer some multiple choice questions. And I'll show you how we do that in just a minute. But as a PLC, when we start to practice some of the skills that we want our students to learn, we think about what are the big ideas in this play. And some of them, of course, in Othello are jealousy and interracial relationships and reputation, which is so important to high school students. And then once we've generated a list of those common ideas, we think, well, what mode of writing do we want them to practice during this unit? Well, one of them that we want them to practice is argument writing. But we also want them to embed pieces of narrative in their argument writing. Think about how often we actually have to ask students to write straight out narratives anymore. It doesn't happen very often, does it, past maybe freshman year? When our students think of narrative, what do they typically think of right off the bat? Personal narrative, right. And it can be that they can embed elements of their own personal narrative, but could it be somebody else's narrative, somebody else's story that they're telling? And so that's, in this assignment, that's what we're going to ask them to do. And then we also wanted to pull some informational and argument text for them to read and give them practice with that, but do it in the context of some of the themes in Othello. So take a look in your packet at the article that's entitled Reputation, Reputation, Reputation. Last year with Othello, with our sophomores, we actually used a different article, and it was one about jealousy in high school students. And they really liked that one. It was at the effects of jealousy among teens. And that one was very relevant because, of course, they all experience jealousy in some form. But this year we decided to use one that, an article that Whitney Weaver from Valley High School found for us this summer, and she actually developed the writing prompt that we're going to look at today. So we're going to use that with the sophomores this year. The article's from the New York Times, and I'm going to read this out loud, the Reputation article. And as we read, could you look for places where the narrative is embedded and maybe take your pen or pencil and mark them? Because I want you to think about the effectiveness of putting in bits of narrative with this argument piece. I think there's some good conversations to have here, because isn't that what happens in Othello? Power goes to the head and costly mistakes are made. I don't know that my students would know General Petraeus or know about him. This happened, what, a year ago or a little over a year ago? But we could definitely have to backfill a lot of this for them. What did you notice about the narrative as it's embedded in this? And I think that's what's so brilliant about the way that's woven into this piece, is that we don't have all of the details. It's not like there's a chunk of narrative in here that does all the backfill for us at once and tells us the background of this story. It's just like we're fed pieces of detail all the way through it, and then there's an explanation or a commentary about that in order for the writer to make her point. Any other things that you notice? What a great way to talk about literary allusions, from the very lofty, Icarus allusion to the very seedy allusion of the housewives, of Centcom. Other things you notice? And I think you're right, with the humor we're hooked in, and then in little pieces we're given out some detail, and then on page 2 we see where they're going to go with it. So flip to the next page and take a look at the writing task that we're going to ask the students to do after they've read this article and after they're a little bit into Othello. Take a minute and read the writing situation in the task, and we've tried to set it up as a PLC so that it looks like an on-demand task. We're not going to ask them to do this in a timed setting, and we'll talk in a minute about the timeline for this, but we want them to get used to looking for some background information or prompt, and then the actual task and looking at where they could find that. As you read the tasks, think about what our students or your students would need to know in order to be able to do this, to write to this. Only not something they can do in a 48-minute timed setting, right? Or a 90-minute timed setting. They're going to have access to research, because they might not even know who General Petraeus is, and they probably are not going to be able to come up with a second example of a leader who's fallen from grace off the top of their head. Some other things that we thought our sophomores would need to know, and we've put it on the template here. They're going to need to know how to organize an argument piece. At J-Town we use the claim, evidence, analysis, organizational structure, and I'm sure you probably use that or something similar to it, and we drill it in every content class. It's part of our policy now, school-wide. But we would have to show them what are some of the elements of an argument piece, what are some of the things that they definitely need to include in order to be able to even address the structure of an argument. They would need to know how to embed narrative in an argument piece, and this would be one model, but I would certainly expose them to a lot more so that they could see how it's skillfully done. This one's pretty sophisticated, and what I found my students doing the first time we gave them an assignment that asked them to embed narrative, they chunked it in there, either right in the middle or right in the beginning, and so that made it hard for them to transition into their argument. So I think showing them how it can be embedded and kind of piecemealed in there is going to make them more sophisticated writers. In the sample, the model piece that you have here under the writing task, that's just an example of how you might respond to this task. They've gone in and found Ron Artest, who was an NBA player that was banned from playing basketball because he went up into the stands, do you remember, a couple of years ago, and he attacked some of the fans that were shouting things at him that he didn't like. And so he kind of fell from grace with the NBA, but found his way back.
He changed his name to World Peace.
Meta World Peace now, and he's come back all new and bright and shiny. And I think, was he traded from the Lakers this year? I think he was traded, but I mean, he's going to land on his feet and do fine. So they can go back. If they can't come up with those examples on their own, they can certainly Google fallen heroes, or that would bring up some articles. This piece we're actually going to give them 5 days to work on, because they could not do it in an on-demand setting if they have to do research. And we want them to do some peer response groups and have time to go back and edit too. A couple of more examples that you have behind that one is one that's for Afghan boys and men, and we've used this one. We are using this one right now. We just assigned this, in fact, about a week ago with our sophomores, because we study the Kite Runner. with those kids. And we found an article about the importance of kite fighting in Afghan culture. And so we copied and pasted that article into a Word document and then embedded these text boxes where we ask them to practice those multiple choice questions. So they're taking an informational article, which, by the way, does have narrative embedded in it. It's a great story about a guy, college student at Columbia, who goes onto the beach and does some kite flying. And one of the little girls, who's 11 years old, he cuts her kite and she cries. And he realizes that kite fighting and kite flying in the U.S. is not the same. It's not a competitive sport here like it is in Afghanistan. So it's a very touching story that's embedded into this informational article about the importance of that sports activity in the culture. But we've put some text boxes in there that ask them as they're reading this article to practice their skills with literary terminology, their reading comprehension, and literary criticism skills. That's the first time we give it to them. And then the next time we ask them to read the article with the prompt and the writing task in mind. And this is one that a lot of our students could do in an on-demand setting. Some of them we asked them to do it in an on-demand setting, and then some of our students we gave them more time to do it, to take it home and think about it and pre-write first. But take a second and read the prompt and the task on the back of that kite fighting article. They all have traditions that their family participates in. We generated a list before they started, and they came up with things like fireworks on the 4th of July, tailgating at ball games, at U of L games. They talked about thunder over Louisville, things that are common to our culture here in Kentucky. So they had great ideas about things that they could write about, and a lot of our ELL students had customs that were so unique to their culture, and we all learned from those as they explained them to us. So this one, they were very successful with, and the rubric that we gave them is attached to the back that uses the skills that come from the standards. And we've just adapted it to make it more specific to some of the skills that we've taught them already in the first 9 weeks that we wanted to see them demonstrate. And then there's an example of a response on the back of that one too. And there's one more example in your packet, and that one goes with Frankenstein. And Frankenstein is a novel we teach in sophomore year to advanced students. And shortly after they got into the novel and started talking about some of the moral and ethical issues that Victor Frankenstein faced in his creation of the creature, we started talking about some more contemporary medical and scientific discoveries that raise some of those same moral and ethical issues. And we even asked CODA, Kentucky Organ Donors affiliates, to come in and talk to them about organ donation. And one of my students' moms was actually on the transplant team that transplanted the first artificial heart in Audubon Hospital, I think it was, to Barney Clark, which was back in the 80s. She was in her 20s then. And so she was on that transplant team and came in and talked to the kids about the moral and ethical issues that the hospital faced during that procedure. So the kids got really interested in, who decides what's right, and those are tough decisions to make. Who makes those decisions? And like Victor Frankenstein operated in isolation, today we can't do that. We have review boards in hospitals that prevent catastrophes from happening, hopefully. So I thought, well, what a great opportunity to ask them to write about this and do some research. So that article kind of gets them to thinking about transplants in infants and what has to happen for an infant to receive a transplant, and who decides what infant gets the transplant and who doesn't. So those are some issues that we talked about in Socratic Seminar and with our guest speakers. And then I asked them to write about it and do some research about some other scientific discoveries. So that writing assignment came from the study of Frankenstein. So 2 things I guess I'd like for you to think about, and I'm going to give you some time to break off here and do some research on your own. One, how you can give students multiple choice practice with informational text by embedding those questions in the article, like in the Kite Runner. We do that also with literary text. When we give them the script from Othello, we don't hand them the book. We download free from the online the text, and then embed questions, EOC-like questions, in the actual script. And so we give it to them to perform, and then after they perform, we sit and analyze the text and talk about some literary devices that are used and some reading comprehension and literary analysis questions. So anytime we get a chance, we embed those kind of questions in what they're reading. Some resources that you asked about, Scott, that we use are on the back of your template, on the back of your blue sheet. There are these resources, and one that I'd like for you to add is SharePoint. I meant to put that one on there because a lot of writing assignments, writing tasks have already been put on SharePoint and JCPS Online. So that would be the first place I would go to see what's already out there. There's some that were done in the work this summer in workshops that address Jane Eyre, Great Gatsby, Animal Farm, Othello. There's some different ones for common text. So check there first and see what's there, and then maybe you can use some of these resources. A great one that I'm just all about this year is the News ELA. And Jenny, I know, sent us out an email that encouraged us to use that. But if you've not checked out News ELA yet, I wanted to show you the beauty of this one and how you can use a common text across all skill levels. This one happens to be the one that came in my inbox today, and what a great, intriguing topic there. But we can take the same article and change the lexile over here. And while right now it's at, I think, a 12th grade level, we can change it and have it jump the same article down to a level that maybe our ELA students could use, our ELL students could use, and our Rank Up students could use. And you can differentiate within the same classroom if we do this, and nobody has to know they're not even reading the same words as everybody else. But it's interesting to play around with that, and I'll give you time to do that, to see what they decide to take out, what they decide to change. I was looking at an article the other day that from this site that was about AP students opening up AP classes to any student that wants to take it. And that's a big push now, I think, nationally from the College Board. And when I changed it from the maximum lexile to the lowest one, they took out the narrative that introduced the whole topic. And instead of having students have to search for the claim and search for the point, the purpose, boom, there it was right up front in the first sentence for our students who struggled with that. So it was interesting to see how they changed that lexile. Some of these have quizzes with them, so you can print those out. You can print, they all come in printable versions, so you can print the quiz or the article. What I'd like to do is give you a few minutes, sit at your table and think about a writing task that would go with a topic or a text that you're working on this year. And know that it doesn't have to be a novel. A lot of times I hear teachers say, well, we don't do novels at our school, we do excerpts or we do short stories. It can be with a short story or a poem or even an informational or argument article that you find. You can develop a writing task that asks students to write in that format in response to the article with embedded narrative elements.